Alright, good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm just going to make a couple of videos this week just to sort of help you get started, because obviously, as I've mentioned in the Compass note, I'm not going to be here for week number 1 due to the injury I've sustained on my leg. Now, what I want to go through this first one is just having a quick look at Unit 3 Outcome 2 as a whole. So you can see here it's quite a long, or not long, but there's quite a number of key knowledge to go through. Usually we'd start looking at project management again, but we've sort of had a bit of a look at that already and made some Gantt charts and things like that. So I'm going to do that when we come back. So I'm going to skip that for now. Then we would normally go to the analysis. So the analysis part of, I'll just flick over here, the analysis part of the problem-solving methodology, so writing down the solution requirements, solution constraints, and scope of solution. You'll be doing these 3 activities during the SAT when you create what's known as, I'll flick back, in this key knowledge here, the solution requirements specification. So it's basically just a large Word document containing a whole lot of information about your program, where you talk about its requirements, the constraints you're going to find, and what's the scope, like what's your program going to do. Within this SRS, the solution requirement specification, again, it's just a big Word document. You also need to include a number of analysis tools, and they are the ones I've sort of spoken to you briefly about them, but what's known here is a use case diagram, a context diagram, and a data flow diagram. Now these are not the design tool diagrams, okay, they're different ones, and these are actually real diagrams too, like they're not made up for the VCE course or anything like that. They are real, tangible things that exist in real software development. What I want to go through just first thing today is the use case diagram. Now we're going to come back to all of these when I get back to school, but these are important for the exam as well as for your SAT, which obviously will be starting during this term. So let's get cracking. I don't want to spend forever going through this because I'm unfortunately going to be talking at you. I couldn't get this to work on my laptop, which would have had a nice webcam and things like that. Okay, so this is Key Knowledge 8, Analysis Tools. We're looking at a use case diagram. Okay, so here's the actual key knowledge. So, sorry if I'm probably going to go a little bit quick. I'll try and slow myself down. Tools and techniques for depicting interfaces between solutions, users, and networks, including use case diagrams created using the Unified Modeling Language. Basically, it's just a collection of icons or symbols that are used in diagrams. Now, as I've mentioned already, these analysis tools are always on the exam. Okay, you have to actually know how to read them and how to create them. Okay, we'll go through an exam question at the end of this as well. Don't worry too much about our notes. So, where are we in the problem-solving methodology? The analysis tools are obviously, these diagrams are part of the analysis phase. Now remember, this term, for our SAT, we're going to be working on these first 2, the analysis and the design. So there's actually not heaps of programming this term. We do most of our programming and development during the start of term 3 and sort of over the holidays. But again, if you want to keep working, well, I suggest you keep working on your prototypes, so at least you've got an idea of how your program is going to work from a programming side. We also need to go through the analysis of it, so actually, jotting down on paper first how it will work, and then our designs as well. Okay, so why do we use analysis tools? Essentially from the book, there are some pages of the book. I have a digital copy of the book here, and it's actually in chapter 4. The pages are a little bit different to in this digital copy compared to yours, but if you want to sort of follow the book, you'll find all this in chapter number 4, so analysis tools. And you can see here use case diagrams. Okay, so why do we use these tools? It's to identify links between these 4 things. The processes, so what your program is actually going to be doing in terms of processing its data. Users, who's going to be using your program, or like the system, if this was like a really large system. Now again, in the exam, you'll be, the case study will involve a larger system with multiple users in it. An organization, so if there are organizations who are sort of linked together, and then the system itself, so like if you were doing like a library booking system, for example, that would be the name of the system. Okay, and we use the analysis tool to sort of draw up a diagram showing how it's going to work, once again, before we start development. As I've talked about many times, proper analysis and proper design is what leads to successful development. Okay. Analysis tools. So these are the 3 we're going to be looking at. Use case diagram, a data flow diagram, and a context diagram. We'll only do use case for this first one today. It discusses here about how they're created using what's known as the Unified Modeling Language. Again, this is a real thing, not some fake VCE made for course topic. And again, it's just a standardized way of modeling diagrams essentially that have to do with analysis of computer programs and computer systems. Okay. So first of all, use case diagram. It's on those pages of the book. I'll quickly flick to the text just so you can see. Here's an example of a use case diagram there, a finished one. Now this is actually probably a bit more complex than even you'll see in any of the exams, which we'll see at the end of this video when we go through the presentation. When we go through the exam question. So you can see there's like sort of stick figures, lines, these ovals, some dotted lines with arrows on them, and this large box here. We're going to talk about what each of these icons and symbols represent to help us create this use case diagram. Again, initially they're a bit difficult to understand, but once you know what each represents and you're given to them in a case study, they should become much easier. Okay, so use case diagram, what is it? Essentially, it's a story showing all the functional aspects of the system. So how does everything interact? It's a very broad tool. It's not like, say, your object description, where you're literally saying this is a button, this is the text that goes on it, this is the font that I'll be using. You know, that's very specific. Use case diagrams are very broad. Like, there might be a use case where I'm going to calculate my body mass index. Like, that's what your program might be doing. You're not going through exactly how it's going to do that. You'll just say calculate BMI. That's actually, I think, what we use in the example in this presentation. Okay, so actually before I go through the icons, I'll just go to a finished one that I've done here. So here's a finished use case diagram that I've created for the BMI calculator that we did for SAC number 1. Okay, so there's, again, this represents the stick figure you saw earlier, but Google Drawing only has the head, so it makes it a bit easier. We're just going to go through what this symbol is here, the large box, these lines, and the ovals that contain certain words. You can see here, the client can calculate the BMI, and and it includes entering weight and height. We're going to discuss what each of these mean over the next few slides. Right, so we jump back. Okay, so the first one we have is what's known as an actor, and that's represented by a stick figure, which we can see in this symbol here. Okay, that's what an actor will generally look like, and that's what they'll look like in the exam. Just for the sake of this simplicity in our presentation, Google Drawing, I've just made it as a head there. So generally speaking, it'll be a noun, and it's something external to the actual physical computer system, and it's usually just a person or an organization. Okay, so if you've had a library system, it would be a librarian, or a user who's coming in, someone who's coming in to borrow a book, something like that. Okay, so that's the first one, an actor. The ovals are actually where the diagram gets its name, a use case. Now that is a function or a piece of processing that happens in the system. Now usually it's a verb, like we're going to be doing something. So in this case, this example here is calculate BMI, so calculate the body mass index. That's what this program is going to allow us to do. So the client is going to do this. Okay, that's the use case, what it will allow us to do. The rectangle is actually quite an easy one. That's the system boundary. So all you do is draw a rectangle and you write the name of the system in the top right hand corner normally. So drawn around the use case symbols that represent the entire system. All your use cases will be inside a square. All your users will be outside the square, as you saw in the previous examples. Again, I'll just scroll down. Hope I'm not going too fast. I apologize if I do. You can see there, each actor is outside the system boundary. Each use case is within the system boundary. Don't worry about too much about this, we'll come back to it. Okay, so the first three. Now, these ones are relatively simple. A user, something the system or program does, the system itself. This is where it gets difficult. The lines are where it gets difficult, and these words here, includes and extends. So basically, if a certain actor can perform a use case, then you draw a line between them. So you can see this sort of line there, and that's known as an association. So it shows the links between the use case and the actor. Now, an actor can have, or the user, I guess, can have be associated with many different use cases, and also a particular use case can be associated with many different users, which I think we'll see in this example here. So you can see here, this administrator can do two things. They can set, this is for a school attendance system, so like, I guess sort of like Compass. An administrator can create a timetable, and they can set teacher allotments, so what teacher classes, the classes they have, and their calendar. Okay, that's the two things that the administrator can do. A teacher can do 1, 2, 3 use cases. Okay, a student can do these two. A parent can do this one. A parent can view student attendance, but for example, a parent cannot create a timetable. There's no link between those two, which obviously makes logical sense. Okay, now, this is the hard part. Includes and extends. This is describing a use case. Generally speaking, if it's got, so calculate BMI, includes, we enter the weight and the height. So we can't calculate the BMI, the system can't do that unless the user has done this. So calculating the BMI includes doing this use case. Now a few rules. The includes will always point away from an actor. You can see here. Includes, see the dotted arrow is pointing away from the original actor here. So calculate BMI, we can only do that. It includes entering the weight and the height. Okay, that's how you read that. So that's the best way to go. The user can calculate the BMI, but it includes them entering the weight and height first. That's how you read it. The opposite way is extends, and this is where the dotted arrow will actually point towards the actor, so to sort of go back the other way. I think there's an example here. Yes, so parent, this one here, view attendance archive is an extension of viewing student attendance. So generally speaking, an extension is something that's optional. So I'll see if I can zoom in a little bit actually. There we go. So a use case that extends another use case is going to be optional. I can just, as a parent, I can view the student attendance. If I want to, I can then view the attendance archive. This example here, the teacher records the class attendance. That includes them checking if anyone's on an excursion. So like that, the idea of that is like if a kid is on an excursion, they're going to have to know that. Okay, so recording class attendance includes checking for excursions as well. Okay, on the list there. That's just the way they've sort of announced it in this part here. That's the hard part. Knowing which way to point, whether it includes or extends, that's where it gets difficult. You can see here, links between use cases. The functionality of a use case enhances another, and it's optional. So that's for extends. Where it includes use cases, something that usually must occur. So I cannot calculate the BMI unless I've also entered weight and height. Okay, that's all the icons, so the 1, 2, 3, and then I guess the association, so normal 1, 4, 5, and it extends as 6. How do you go about making a use case diagram? It's best to do it in this order. First of all, identify the actors or the users, so all the stick figures or the circles, and you draw them on your piece of paper. Next, you'll draw the system boundary, so the large box you can see here. Okay, that's like that represents the system, or in our case, it's probably just going to be a program. Identify the use cases. So what does the program or system allow us to do? Okay, and you draw them in. Okay, in circles here. Then draw the connections or associations between the use cases and the actors. So what use cases can each actor do? Okay, you draw lines in between them. Now, you don't have to draw a line. As you can see here, enter weight and height is not actually connected to the client directly. It goes through the calculate BMI, because like I'm going to calculate BMI, but I have to include doing enter weight and height. So you don't need a line connecting them directly. Once you've done that, the final thing is to draw the includes and extends connections between the use cases. Remember, includes use cases or arrows will always point away from the actor. Extends use cases will always point back towards the actor. Okay, there's certain rules. I think they're mentioned as well in the textbook here. You can see basically here actor. Here's some use cases. So if you sort of need a bit more assistance as well, here's a nice description of each of the parts of the diagrams here as well. Okay, so again, there's a basic use case diagram that I've made for the SAC 1 essentially.